Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. We will be comparing the two current DPS queens of Genshin Impact. Starting off with our contestants, we have the mightiest secretary in all of Teyvat, the goat-human hybrid, Ganyu. With her broken charge shot multipliers and a weapon designed just for her, Ganyu is one of the most broken characters in the entire game. Throughout this video, my Ganyu's damage potential ranges from 79% to 94%, depending on party resonances. I will mainly be focusing on her freeze build in this video. Again, my damage potentials are calculated based on how much damage my current character does in comparison to essentially the maximum amount of damage they can do with nearly perfect artifacts, as well as maxed out talent levels. Next, we have the whimsically annoying funeral parlor director, Hu Tao. Since her debut, she's been melting the competition and her damage output is absolutely insane, and she's sure to create a lot of additional customers for the Wangsheng Funeral Parlor. Throughout this video, I used multiple different builds for Hu Tao, with the primary one being a charged attack carry with the Crimson Witch set. I also have a Vape or Melt focus build with an EM timepiece, and a couple no crit rate variations set up for maximum damage while she utilizes her Constellation 6. Hu Tao's damage potential throughout this video is noticeably lower, ranging between 67% to 73%. Speaking of damage potentials, it's worth noting that Ganyu is generally easier to maximize her damage potential, since most of her damage comes from her charge shot. Meanwhile, Hu Tao's damage comes from all three of her skills. Regardless, both these characters are properly whaled, and I wanted to push my Hu Tao and Ganyu to their limits. As such, when possible, I include beneficial party resonances like Childe, Pyro Resonance, and also Cryo Resonance. Now usually, I don't like to include full party scenarios due to the extreme variance in combinations, and then it just leads to situations like these. But in this video, I tried something new, and I will be including a full team composition comparison near the end. Anyway, enough diddle-daddling, let's have a DPS showdown. We'll start off with raw elemental damage output, and also with my favorite volunteers, the Cryo and Pyro Regisvines. As usual with our favorite punching bags, they live for such a short amount of time that it's hard to extrapolate anything from murdering them. Nonetheless, I always like opening up with them because they serve as an appetizer of sorts, essentially the salad to the main course. And with Ganyu, I used her Constellation 6 to have 3 nearly instant charge shots to quickly dispatch the Pyro Regisvine. Next we have our second most favorite punching bag, Dvalin. It's worth noting that disabling the Y-axis reset in the menu doesn't actually work during the Dvalin fight. Anyway, I start timing right when Dvalin gets knocked out of the sky. As usual, most melee characters have a disadvantage during this fight, needing to climb up Dvalin's neck in order to hit his overgrown zit. However, once Hu Tao gets to it, she can quickly clear it out with incision and drainage. For Ganyu, because of the earlier Y-axis problem during the Dvalin fight, I had to try this a couple of times. With some practice, and by utilizing her Constellation 6, I did manage to shave off a couple seconds from my previous attempts. Because of the range favorability in this fight, Ganyu pulled ahead by a few seconds. Next we have the Childe boss fight. I'm still salty about his obsession with dropping tusks for me instead of his various plugs, so this is the perfect time to beat him up for some revenge. Compared to my previous video, I managed to optimize Hu Tao's rotation versus Childe a bit more. By using Hu Tao's Constellation 6 to survive the initial onslaught of attacks, and by snapshotting her burst during the end of her E duration, Hu Tao is able to dispatch Form 1 and Form 2 Childe within one E window, and thus bypassing her downtime weakness here. And unfortunately, the third form teleported away from me, so a second or two could have been saved, but I still thought this was a good enough performance for Hu Tao. Likewise for Ganyu, I managed to shave off a significant amount of time compared to the previous run. By fishing for a couple lucky crits at the beginning of the fight, Phase 1 and 2 Childe get deleted in pretty much no time at all. For the third phase, I could have saved at least 1 second with Ganyu if Childe teleported close enough for her E's to connect, and if I didn't dash here for no apparent reason. This is remarkable because of how closely the two perform compared to each other. Next we have the second newest addition to my DPS showdowns, the Primo Geovishap. The Primo Geovishap has a much larger HP pool compared to the previous bosses. A well-wailed Hu Tao is able to one-cycle it by using a no-crit build, and thus she still manages to bypass her downtime weakness. Again, I snapshotted Hu Tao's burst at the end of her E duration to squeeze out the maximum amount of damage as possible, and it was just enough to one-cycle it. For Ganyu, she's able to buffer her bonus charge shot crit rate and her burst during the Primo Geovishap's roaring time. Then, she can simply focus on outputting as much cryo damage as she can. But this performance was honestly expected, and it's no surprise that given the opportunity to wail freely on an opponent, Hu Tao would win this by a couple of seconds. And finally, I am excited to introduce a new metric for me to compare characters, and that is the Abyss 12 Gauntlet Run. What is the Abyss Gauntlet Run? It is a full team running through all 3 floors of Abyss Part 1. For a DPS showdown, the teams will heavily rely on the main carry or main character to showcase for damage. Retrying is allowed, but all 3 chambers must be from the same run. This way, your decisions in the previous floor will affect your next floor's performance. And finally, both teams will pick cards that do not boost their damage. Here are the teams I used. Ganyu is running a freeze build, and her teammates are a Noblesse Oblige Bennett, Viridescent Venti with the Elegy for the End, and Mona with the Thrilling Tales. For Hu Tao, I am running her with an Elemental Mastery Timepiece. Her teammates include Xing Chu with the Sacrificial Sword, Thrilling Tales Noblesse Oblige Mona, and finally, Support Ganyu with the Elegy for the End. I wanted both teams to have Elegy, and since Venti does a lot of damage for Ganyu's team, I figured Ganyu's burst can do some damage for Hu Tao's team. But before starting the showcase, might I ask you for your support by clicking on that subscribe button. It's the best and free way for you to support my passion for pitting our favorite characters in Genshin Impact against each other, and to continue to push our knowledge of the game as much as possible. Anyway, let's take a look at my first ever full team comp Abyss 12 Gauntlet DPS Showdown. It may have been a little hard to tell what happened between the runs, so allow me to break each one down. Starting off with Hu Tao in Abyss 12-1. Despite some unlucky crits, her charge attacks and bursts quickly dispose of the enemies. One interesting thing to note about Hu Tao is that it actually takes quite a bit of time for her to really ramp up her damage in an Abyss run. Because she always starts off the first chamber with full HP, it's not until her second E that she's under 50% HP, which increases her damage substantially. Alternatively, you can intentionally take damage, but I didn't in this case. For 12-2, this floor was by far the most challenging floor for both runs. I had to refill Ganyu's and Mona's bursts, while also dealing with the annoying mages and their fly infestations. But eventually, I figured out that bursting down the last Assassin mage saved much more time on this floor in comparison to using it against the robots in 12-3. As for Ganyu, I found my runs with her Gauntlet runs to be overall more consistent than Hu Tao's. In 12-1, it's pretty crazy, but her blooms were doing over 100,000 damage each. Keep in mind there are no reactions happening here. That is just raw cryo damage. And you may have noticed that I switched to Venti at the end of this chamber to try and get him some energy for the next floor. 12-2 was again the most annoying floor for Ganyu. The Cryo Assassin mages increased cryo resistance also put Ganyu at a slight disadvantage here, but overall this was more about energy management with Venti to get his burst up as quickly as possible in order to ball up the mages and dispose of them. Unfortunately, I wasted a Constellation 6 charge shot with Ganyu because I forgot I had it buffered up, but oh well. And here we have 12-3 again, with the usual Bennett and Mona setup. I then used Venti's E to lower their cryo resistances. Ganyu's blooms are doing around 90,000 damage, so it was fairly trivial to take out these robots with her. Many of you may have been wondering how Melt Ganyu performs, so don't worry, I also did a Gauntlet run for Melt Ganyu as well. The first thing I'd like to point out about Melt Ganyu is that she has serious consistency issues without crit cards, and since I set the earlier rule of no offensive cards, I cannot pick any crit cards for Ganyu. Since my Melt Ganyu is around 50% crit rate, in order to speed up a lot of these chambers, the blooms need to crit upwards of 6 times. This has a traumatizingly low 6% chance to occur. So I had a lot of problems with Melt Ganyu's consistency. Also, without freeze, I often actually get hit by the enemies. So really, the overall variance in performance between these two characters is quite small, and I also personally strongly prefer Freeze Ganyu over Melt Ganyu due to the consistency of the freeze build. Now if we add up all my times across all these situations, including all the previous boss fights, Hu Tao clocked in at 98.7 seconds while Ganyu is sitting at 95.3 seconds if we use the time from her Melt run. Now again, Ganyu is closer to her maximum damage potential in comparison to Hu Tao, but frankly, this tiny difference in performance really doesn't matter at this point. These are both two very well-wailed characters. And also, it's important to note that there will always be ways to improve any of these individual times. So to me, a reasonable margin of error would be 5%, and these two have only a 3.5% variance based on my personal anecdotal times. And just to hammer in this point, here is a full Abyss 12 run with no crit rate Hu Tao in part 1, and Freeze Ganyu in part 2.
描き方し、この件はわかるか。さゆる。
おとなしくしやがって。
相関化粧。くらえ。おさわり禁止。燃えろ。風だ。相関化粧。へい、ここだよ。
岩山八九。
歌よ錦と。
すまんすまん。
さよなら。おい、やっ行こう。相関化粧、この仕事は排除するべきで。
みんなは俺が守る。
逃げようなんて思わないでよね。これが運命です。相関化粧、おさわり禁止。
Another amazing thing about these two characters is that they can both extremely effectively run a completely different set of supports. The total times for each of these characters is in this chart. It's also worth noting that my 12-2 performance with Ganyu is absolutely terrible, and I believe it's possible to save upwards of 10 seconds there. But in the end, I didn't want to get too sweaty grinding this, and both of these characters are able to dumpster this current abyss and go well beyond my personal expectations for their performances. Character strengths will always fluctuate. There are so many factors that affect how good a character is. It could be based on the type of mob that the endgame content has, or it could be based on a new support character that complements one character more than the other. My point is, the meta will always change. But as for today's meta, as of March 25th, 2021, both Ganyu and Hu Tao are the current meta-defining DPS characters that we can rely on. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think Hu Tao is better? Do you think Ganyu is better? Or do you think they're both better than everyone else? Anyway, this video was a ton of fun to make, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.